Hello and welcome to another special edition of Wellbeing Wednesdays with myself, Dr. Giles P. Croft, and my colleague, Dr. Bryan McElroy. Hi, Bryan. How are you doing?
Hi, Giles. Hi, everybody.
Now then, what are we talking about today then? We got half an hour. Let's do this thing.
So today, Giles, we're going to talk about anxiety and the whole spectrum that is anxiety, from a mild feeling of uneasiness to a full-blown panic attack or recurring panic attacks. As a GP, it's incredibly common to see either people coming in presenting saying that they're anxious or presenting with some manifestation of anxiety. And I thought it would be a really interesting topic to explore from this innate health, innate happiness perspective.
Yeah, it's been in the news as well, hasn't it? I've seen a couple of articles recently saying that there's some huge proportion of the British public now are experiencing anxiety and panic attacks. So where do we start? Well, I suppose we could start at the end, couldn't we? We could start with the punchline. We could start with the punchline and work backwards, because as you guys who you know us too, maybe a little bit, you'll know that we don't see things necessarily the same way as everybody else does. And for me, I'm going to say this in the security of my home office where nobody can get me, is that those feelings of anxiety and panic are actually very helpful. And this is the place that we get to when we have an understanding of innate health and we have an understanding of how we're experiencing the world, is that feelings of anxiety and panic are helpful. Crazy talk, isn't it, Bryan?
Yeah. I appreciate that might sound crazy to some people.
Yeah.
But if you can even consider that as a possibility and are curious enough to listen for the next 25 minutes, then it may be very worthwhile. To respond to that, I guess, like in my experience, I had panic attacks when I was in my early 20s as a third or fourth year medical student. And panic attacks, I remember one GP telling me that panic attacks are probably the scariest thing that you'll ever experience, because you literally think you're going to die and you've got all these physical symptoms which are suggesting that you're having a panic attack and your whole body's going to break down, basically. So it's an extremely fearful experience. And when someone first presents to me with a panic attack, I often say, well, you've been through the worst thing that can happen to you. It can only get better from here. And for a lot of people, that's all it is. A lot of people experience 1, 2, 3 panic attacks, and that's it. Some people go on to experience a lot more. But the people who, I guess, make inroads or make progress the quickest, in my experience, are people who can see that there is a psychological dimension to this experience, and who can have some insights as to what's really making them anxious. So for me, I think when I was in my early 20s, my panic attack was like, on retrospect, like a culmination of a year of low-grade anxiety, low-grade worry, and it just came out of the blue. So if someone asked me, were you particularly anxious on that night when I was just sipping a beer in someone's garden, I would have said no, but actually it was this kind of culmination of a feeling, a thought feeling that something is not quite right, and something's not quite right, and something good isn't going to happen. There's just something off. And that sense can just build up over time and can culminate in these kind of physical manifestations. And obviously that was my experience. For other people, it can be a sense of paranoia that brings about a panic attack. It can be a terrible scene that they see and memories of that scene that they're subjected to, like a car crash or finding someone injured, or perhaps even finding a close person dead. Like there's a whole range of reasons why people can experience anxiety, but there's always some stressful thinking behind those experiences. And if people can kind of catch sight of that, then that sense of being completely contracted can sometimes just, the bubble can sometimes burst completely, but sometimes it's just a gradual, okay, well, apart from all this stressful thinking that seems incredibly real, that actually I'm okay and that things are okay, that life is okay. So that's kind of my response to that suggestion, Giles, and I'd be very curious to hear yours.
Yeah, I mean, just listening then, I mean, it's it's one of those things because it has such a physical component. It's all, and you know, when it's happening, it's impossible really to kind of like to see outside of that, because it's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean there's a psychological component? What? Because you know, I've got every bit of evidence I could possibly ask for that there's something wrong here. Every bit of evidence possible. You know, it's like my heart's racing and I can't breathe, and you know, it's a really physical thing. So that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary. But like when you were talking, then you said about it kind of like been building up to it, and I wonder if we could, because I mean, you see patients with you know, with anxiety and panic attacks more regularly than I do in my practice, and is it fair to say that no one really kind of like has a panic attack, you know, like wakes up one day and just starts having a panic attack, or is it something that sort of gradually builds up in your experience?
Yeah, like I think for some people, they describe that it comes out of the blue. They describe that it completely comes out of the blue. But I'm pretty much convinced that even when it apparently comes out of the blue, that actually there is some psychological dimension that a person may not be fully aware of or conscious of. And I've been working with someone recently, and when she was describing her experiences of COVID, and she was feeling an incredible amount of anxiety, the kind of underlying belief there was that something terrible is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. And that's a very understandable, and you could almost say logical conclusion or belief when the media and the news is giving you these images and giving you these messages of we all need to be hyper alert. And we were pretty much getting that message, or else something terrible is going to happen. And when we worked with that kind of transformed things, because we could then see, my client could see that actually something terrible, it was equally as true that something terrible isn't going to happen or may never happen. And we lose sight of those kind of possibilities when we're kind of, for want of better words, kind of like when there's Velcro between us and those beliefs that are extremely stressful. And when we're in that place, our mind creates all the evidence to show that, yes, no, but something terrible is genuinely going to happen.
It's amazing.
And sorry to go back to, so that's I guess that's kind of an understandable and kind of logical psychological element, but sometimes it does seem to come out of the blue. And then in other situations, it's also really important sometimes to rule medical causes, because occasionally you do pick up people with heart problems or thyroid problems. So it is important to bear that in mind as well, particularly if you don't feel any, you know, if you genuinely don't think that you've got any psychological stuff going on, for want of better words, or there's not a lot of fear in your life.
And I think one of the I think one of the biggest problems is that we become accustomed to thinking in a particular way. We become accustomed to the chatter in our heads, and it seems completely normal. It's like it happens so gradually over a period of time that because we've all got this narrator. It's just I've been doing a bit of neuroscience recently, and it's the differences between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and we've basically got two brains in there, and they're doing very different jobs. And the left hemisphere, its job is to make sense of the world. It's to find patterns. It's to categorize things. It's to put things into perspective, and it's to create a logical narrative around the raw data of our environment that's just kind of like streaming in through our senses all the time. So it's there for a very, very good reason. It's there for a very good reason. It's something that we've evolved over millions of years. And we're the only species who can do that whole thing of kind of like, well, no, I say that, but squirrels collect nuts, don't they? So they do. They must be a bit future thinking. But in terms of like really planning things, sending someone to the moon, for instance, the chimps haven't done that yet, have they? So that kind of ability is all there for a very good reason. But then we take that left hemisphere activity completely for granted, and the vast majority of people that I work with aren't even really aware that they've got a busy mind. They're not even really aware they've got a busy mind. Some people might have the insight, I'm pretty busy minded, but most people, I'll sit down and we'll start having a conversation. It's like, it strikes me you've got a very busy mind. And they're like, well, I can notice that I'm a lot chatterier than you are, doctor. And so what I mean, this is kind of like going back to the whole, it coming out of the blue. I don't think it ever really does come out of the blue. I think that we get these warning symptoms. One of our mentors, Dr. Bill Pettit, talks about the feelings that we have being the alarm getting louder and louder and louder, and a panic attack, it lies at the end of the, it's getting louder and louder and louder, and it's deafening. It's the same with with depression, depression that's going to completely take you offline. It's like blowing a fuse. It's the system saying, well, you've been ignoring the feelings. They've been getting louder and louder, these feelings, and you're still not paying attention. So I'm going to take the system offline here, and whether the system goes offline from having a panic attack or it goes offline from depression, the mechanism is exactly the same, as far as I'm concerned. And so I suppose we then have to ask the question, well, what do you mean what the feelings have been telling me? I know what my feelings have been telling me. They've been telling me that the world's a big scary place, and there's COVID, and there's and I might lose my job, and my bank account's empty, and and I'm terrified of this and that. What do you mean? What are my feelings telling me? And so maybe we should talk about what feelings are telling us.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I guess, like, in my experience, feelings are always telling us what's on our mind. Essentially, they're a reflection, moment by moment, of what we're thinking, what we're believing, what we're taking seriously. And even if it means, even if we get an email to say, I apologize, but you've lost your job because of COVID or whatever it is, then in that moment, there's still, if someone feels anxious or absolutely exasperated, it's not because of that sentence. It's not because of the reality of losing one's job, even though that may mean a lot of change, and it may mean, making significant changes and losing some things that you really cherish, and it may mean making a lot of sacrifices. It's still the kind of, if you feel panicked in that moment, it's because of thoughts and beliefs such as, this is awful, or this means I won't be able to feed myself or my family. Or it's kind of the reaction in that moment to that, what you call raw data, but that information in a sense. And if you read that and your left brain hemisphere couldn't function, you'd literally be sitting in a room looking at squiggles on a screen. And you could, or if you were telling the story afterwards, you could say, well, I opened up my email and I lost my job. But then if you look at it from a completely, like, almost meaningless point of view, you could say, well, I opened up my emails, I read an email, full stop, and that's obviously maybe oversimplistic, but that's actually what happened. It's the meaning making that results in us extracting life's events and internalizing them all the time that brings about our anxiety. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, and sometimes we need to experience it, or we need to process it, and it's part of being human. I don't know anyone who hasn't experienced anxiety to some degree or another. But if we can catch sight of the kind of the root of it, then it means we don't have to be such 100% victim of it all the time. And when we are, we can, if we know that our thinking is changing and will change, and that we're more than our thinking, we're always the awareness behind our thinking. There's an awareness nature there that's untouched. Then when we are thinking anxious thoughts or feeling anxious, then we can just allow that to happen and not get overly involved in trying to fix that.
Yeah, because it's not that we're making it up, or that bad things don't happen. There's all manner of circumstances going on, and right now there are a lot more. There's a lot more going on that's doing this to us. But seeing that we're only ever that, there's only ever now, there's only ever the present moment, and so our feelings can't be telling us anything about the future and what might happen, because the future is a thought that's happening right now in this moment. And that's the beauty of the feelings, is that they're an absolute, they're airtight. There's not one single thought that you've had ever in your life that's not got a feeling component to it, and there's not one feeling that you've ever had in your life that's not the other side of a thought. And so seeing that every feeling that we have is a reflection of I like the word quality, a reflection of the quality that thought is taking in that moment. Because we think it's telling us about the content of those thoughts. We think that it's got a whole load of really useful information about what might happen in the future and what that might mean for us, and the consequences and things like that. But that's just a bunch of left brain activity that's struggling because with uncertainty and struggling to come up with a story. But you might as well go and grab one of your kids' books and open that to see what might happen in your life next, because it's as baseless as that. It's just chitter chatter from the left brain. And the feelings are telling us about the quality, not as in good or bad. There's no such thing as good or bad. Just the actual the characteristics that thought is taking in that moment. You know, how am I experiencing the world right now? Oh, I'm experiencing the world with my anxious goggles on. I'm experiencing the world with my anxious goggles on, and when we don't see that we've got a pair of anxious goggles on, well, because they're goggles everywhere we look, everything we think about, everywhere we turn our attention to, we're going to feel anxious about that thing too. And left brain loves that, absolutely loves it, because it's like, oh, yep, there's some more evidence, and oh, there's some more evidence, and oh, yep, there's another reason for being anxious. But we've not noticed that we've got a pair of anxious goggles on.
Mm-hmm.
And all that we need to do is, from listening to people like us talking about the way that the mind works, is to have that moment where we're like, oh yeah, this is one of those moments where it's like it's just, and I say it's just goggles. The experience is very, very real in that moment, but it's coming through the lens of those anxious goggles, and those can come off at any time. And they do come off at any time, because if somebody suffering with anxiety and panic attacks, although it feels like it's all the time, it's not all the time at all. It's not all the time. When it's not in consciousness, it's not there at all. The goggles aren't on. It's when the goggles go on.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I always ask people, and we're not encouraged to ask this or trained to ask this as GPs, but it's because we're told to ask, or trained to ask. So all about your anxiety, or all about your depression, or all about your low mood. But I always ask, has there been a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the last 2 weeks or month where you felt okay, or where you felt a little bit of enjoyment? And it's for me, it's such an important question, because otherwise, by even having a conversation where we're just looking at anxiety, person's going to be more reinforced that they're an anxious person.
Yeah.
If you don't kind of balance that a little bit, because almost everybody can find, oh yeah, there was that moment when I was drinking tea, or when I was playing with my child, or when I was going for a walk, whatever it is. And I often reframe that by saying, well, that's actually, that's a better indicator of who you are, rather than the 90% of anxiety that you're feeling, no matter how rubbish someone's feeling. That's a really, really important glimpse. The other thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if you've ever seen the TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor.
I have, yeah. I did a whole other episode of Wellbeing Wednesdays about the neuroscience, and I mentioned that. I mean, what a video! I encourage
It's
everyone
incredible.
to go and watch that.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And like, it just, as you were saying, you've got the left side of the brain, which is the chatterbox, and then we have this, and we work a lot on this in Alexander technique, where we bring more and more attention to our bodies in space, and we almost train ourselves to become more and more attentive to that. And it's an amazing experience to spend days training in this kind of awareness, because there's no limit to it, because there's no limit. But as far as I'm aware, there's no limit to space. It's just always present. And, you can become aware of the space in the room that you're in. You can kind of sense the space that's outside the room, or the town that you're in, or the county that you're in. It's endless.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened to Jill Bolte Taylor in an insight when she had a stroke into the left side of her brain, and she experienced this experience in this person that she absolutely never knew, that was 100% peaceful and calm, and this primitive sense of being. It's very beautifully told in her story. But it reminds me also, like, it seems that often when I speak, particularly with young people who play sports, and I ask them, do you play sport? Do you feel anxious when you're playing football or when you're running? And most of the time, most people don't feel it when they're playing sports, because it's like they activate that kind of present moment, spatially aware, embodied sense of self. And then gradually as they're driving home from their football game or whatever it is, the anxiety starts to creep back
Starts
in.
up again, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And it's probably also why people really enjoy sports. It's another reason, one of probably many reasons. But yeah, it's such an interesting kind of thing to consider that, okay, well, actually right now, if you become aware of yourself in this room, in space, like the support that you have from the floor, your breath, when you pay attention to those very simple things, anxiety levels tend to reduce for all of us. And that's a kind of pretty universal thing as far as I'm aware. And obviously there's whole, spiritual paths that people completely immerse themselves in for their whole lives to experience that perhaps at a deeper and deeper level. But at the same time, there's also paths such as the path like I need health and happiness, where it's purely about seeing that left brain activity, that chatterbox, for what it is, and acknowledging its presence and not pushing it away, not fighting it, but just kind of seeing it for what it is, and seeing it both as part of you in a sense, but very much just as part of you. That there's a whole other self. There's a whole deeper dimension to who you are that's not that chatterbox. And that's very hard to put into words, but
specifically because language lives in the left hemisphere.
Yes. Yeah.
This is what we're up against in this work, is that we can have conversations, but language, where that everything, anyone watching this conversation, it's all being processed by the left brain. And yet there's something much deeper than that, that is our true nature, that has got nothing to do with language, and it's got nothing to do with categories. That is a tiny part of what we are. Tiny part. And I mean, it's funny because we in the absence of knowing that the left brain just like literally makes stuff up. I mean, it literally, I'm sure you're aware of the split brain experiments with people who had epilepsy, where they did surgery to sever the link between the two sides of the brain. And they'd asked them to perform basic tasks and then explain why they'd done that basic task. Well, when the two hemispheres were disconnected, if they gave the task to the right hemisphere, the person could understand it and could perform the task, no problems whatsoever. But because the two bits of the brain weren't communicating, when they were asked to explain why they'd done this task, because language lives in the left brain would have to do the best that it could to come up with a reason for why they'd done this task. And the reason was, well, because you asked me to, you, the experimenter, you asked me to do that. But left brain would come up with all kinds of fictions. Like, it would literally just make stuff up. It's like, well, I wanted to go and get a can of Coke from the fridge. And it's like, what, where did that come from? It literally makes stuff up. And just seeing that, we think there's the problem. We think that it's like that it contains loads of useful information, and oh my word, and we get a bit panicky just thinking about, well, but what would I do without that narrator? How would I know what to do? Well, we look at kids, look at babies. Babies know how to be babies without any of this going on. Babies don't even know that there's the, what is it, the Rouge experiment, where before a certain age you can stick a child in front of a mirror and you can put some lipstick on their cheek and they don't know it's them. They've got no concept of self whatsoever, because left brain hasn't created it. You get to a certain age before even your idea of Brian and my idea of Giles are even a thing. I mean, all the answers are there. It's just it's having the I think it's something that you that 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 we get an experiential understanding of. You know, we can read books and we can listen to conversations and stuff, but until we have an insight, until we have a realization around this, that oh yeah, no, I don't have to I I don't have to believe what's going on in my head. I don't have to believe that chatter.
Mm. Mm.
And maybe in retrospect see, oh, hang on a minute, I've not really been paying much attention to that, and I'm still okay. In fact, I'm more than okay,
Mm.
because I'm not listening to a little voice telling me I'm not okay.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, coming back to our 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 punchline about the feelings being helpful.
Mm. Mm.
Well, we start to see the uncomfortable feelings as a gentle pointer that we're up in our heads,
Mm. Mm.
that
Mm.
we're living inside our left hemisphere's activity, and it's just activity. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And so we've got this beautiful inbuilt mechanism which is called our feelings, that tells us how present we are, that tells us how much in the natural flow of life we are, compared to not in the natural flow of life, which is often a bunch of stories that are being created by our left hemisphere. And so, you know, as soon as we start feeling those feelings, they're not telling us about what we're thinking about, they're telling us that we're thinking. It's like,
Mm.
yeah, you know, Giles, buddy. I mean, it happens to me all the time. Happened the other day. I said it in this week's Wellbeing Wednesdays. I had a little afternoon snooze, and I woke up from the snooze with a start, and I was like, my thinking went from 0 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, like that, at the drop of a hat. With, why did you have a snooze? Why aren't you working? All these things that you've got to do. You know, it was just like, whoa, boom, straight in my head. And that comes with a feeling, and that feeling isn't telling me about all the things I haven't done, and it's not telling me about the fact that I've just had a snooze. I was dog tired, I needed one, not slept very well the night before. It's telling me that I'm not present. I'm not in reality. I'm off up in those stories. That's what
Mm.
those feelings are telling me. And so they're really helpful. I felt anxious, and it's like, thanks, anxious feelings.
Mm.
I'm going to lie
Mm.
here and enjoy the sunlight coming through the window for a minute, and then, you know, crack on.
Mm. 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 So in a sense, I guess if someone listening now has been or is feeling anxious,
Mm.
what are we suggesting? I guess, and I don't know what I'm going to say here, but I guess we're suggesting that there's nothing wrong with you. Anxiety is a built-in part of being a human being.
Yeah.
100% of people feel it to some degree or another at some time or another. And also that if people can get a sense that, yeah, that it is coming from their narrative, so it is coming from this chatterbox, it's coming from the kind of usually distorted, not necessarily true, sometimes completely absurdly false thoughts that are cropping up for them. And it could be in relation
Well,
to
Brian, let's
themselves.
not beat around the bush. There's no possibly or maybe or sometimes. It's like it's not fact. Like, it's 0% fact. The stuff that's going on in our head, it's
Mm,
0%. It's not true, is it? It's not
mm,
truth.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
It's after the fact, and it's a little bit of separation that's been created, and it's not we don't have to listen to it at all. We can get by perfectly without paying any attention to it at all. Sorry, I just
No, that's okay.
the fiction.
And I guess so. That, I guess if we're suggesting anything, it's an attention shift.
Yeah.
So we're suggesting, well, you don't have, if you have been attending to those kind of thought patterns or those thoughts, then you can shift your attention into the present moment. And very quickly, or perhaps gradually in some instances, you'll start to feel better.
I think I always say, because like every single one of us is doing what makes sense in any given moment. So I know this might sound a bit weird, but if someone's having panic attacks, that's because it makes sense to have a panic attack. Someone's having incredibly anxious thinking and can't let go of it, that's because it makes sense not to do that. And so we get into difficulty when we take it on as our job. It's like, I've got to sort this out. I've got to stop these panic attacks. I've got to stop this anxiety. Any trying that's involved at all is just adding layer and layer and layer of thought onto it. Oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this. It's like, it's all thought. It's just like layer upon layer upon layer of thought. And so, and this often doesn't sound very helpful, but you'll stop being anxious when it doesn't make sense to be anxious anymore. Like, it's not your job. Like, anyone listening to this, it's not your job to stop feeling anxious. You will stop feeling anxious when it just doesn't make any sense to feel anxious anymore. And the more we try and control things, which isn't the way it works, the louder it's going to get. So we're all doing what makes sense. So there's no judgment here. It's just, this is just the way it is. We're all doing what makes sense to us in every given moment. And so that shift in awareness, I mean, when I'm working with clients, often it won't be when they're experiencing something that they have insights. It's when they're not experiencing something that they have insights. They're like, hang on a minute, I would have normally panicked in that situation, and I didn't. What's going on? Oh, that's often the way it works. Because when we're in the middle of something, it's we can do the common sense things like taking deep breaths, and there was always the, like, when I was a kid, it was breathing into a paper bag. Do we still recommend that, Dr. Bryan?
Jazz. I don't think so.
What was it? Bring up the carbon dioxide levels or something? I don't know. Good grief. Yeah. Can't see how that's going to help. So there's common sense things, but in terms of bigger picture, longer term, then what the way it seems to happen is that people stop being anxious when it just doesn't make sense to be anxious anymore. When you can see that, oh, hang on a minute, that anxiety is coming from the narration of what is, that it's not me per se at all. If we don't identify with the stories.
I love that word, identify. So when I looked it up in the dictionary once, it means to become one with.
Yeah.
And that's the key, isn't it? That's the key. When we're not anxious, when we're just in a flow, usually we're not identified with.
Yeah, we're not there.
We're not identified with stressful thinking. We're either having few or no thoughts, or the thoughts that are coming up are just not very, they're light, and they're not very serious, or they're relevant to the present moment, and they're just guiding us along. When we're in a panic attack, when we're really anxious, then typically we're our thoughts, and we're just like that with our thoughts. We're one and the same. maybe a useful question is, am I identified, or am I just completely caught up in my thinking right now if someone is feeling anxious? And you don't need to answer that question with your logical left brain mind. You can just see what it opens up, because sometimes it can just open up a gap or a sense of space around all those thoughts that have been going on. And it can change so quick, like for me, like I can be with my partner or with a friend, and when I realize I'm caught up, or at a dinner or whatever, when I realize I'm caught up in stressful thinking, my perception of those people just shifts pretty much immediately. I start to see them as alive, equal, living, vibrant creatures, and all the judgments or the negativity just very quickly dissolves or vanishes. And it's not like, I guess perhaps you could say I'm just putting on a new pair of goggles. I'm putting on my but actually what it feels like is, it just feels like I'm taking off a pair of goggles and I'm just seeing and connecting with reality. And again, language is limited, so it's going to be tricky no matter how you put it. But that's how it feels like to me, that actually when I come out of my stressful habitual thinking, it just feels like actually I'm just taking off something, I'm just delayering, and I'm a little bit more kind of just in touch, like life is more intimate, and the kind of the beauty of life and the simplicity of life is just more there. It's just more present,
evident.
just more there, and it's just more here. It's where I am.
Yeah, I do. I feel a lightness. I heard someone say that, like, one of the things to look out for is, like, if you really are in the middle of something, is to just look for the okayness in that moment. And I mean, the biggest insight I had was up on stage in front of 100 people, when I found myself just tearing up my script and standing there not having any idea how I was going to fill the next hour. I just knew I wasn't going to give the talk that I was supposed to. And yet I'd been around this conversation long enough, looking in this direction, as they say, doing a bit of reading, listening to some conversations about it, that from the outside, it would have looked absolutely terrible. What's he doing? What's he doing? And I felt, I had all the symptoms, like I could barely hear. My heart was hammering in my ears so loud. I had no idea what I was going to say, but I felt not just okay, but I felt like I was carried through that hour. And to, I mean, I talk about it as experiencing my own health. And I think we can have those moments, and it can be at any moment at all. It can be in the middle of a panic attack. It can be in the middle of the most stressful situation possible. And just seeing that we're absolutely okay. At a fundamental level, there's the only thing that's getting in the way of that okayness is that little voice that's telling us that we're not okay.
I love that idea, Giles. Can I see the okayness in this moment? Yeah. It's a real opener, isn't it? It's really nice.
And left brain will do its absolute level best to convince you otherwise.
Well, kind of, I think, because I kind of feel like the left brain works in patterns, and if you start to see the okayness, the left brain will actually it won't have as much to say.
Oh no!
Notice
when it realizes it's been put out of a job, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it.
Surplus. It's surplus to requirements. That's the thing. It's surplus. It's the wrong tool for the job. It's the wrong tool for the job. It's good for winning pub quizzes, and it's good for writing shopping lists. But when it comes to actually experiencing life and having a good experience of life, well, actually experiencing life as it is, then it's only ever going to get in the way, because it's after the fact. By the time your left brain gets hold of it, the moment's gone. It's busy. It's busy trying to. It's like one of those automatic translation things that happens, at the bottom of the TV screen on the news. If there's some computer software doing it, it's a bit like that, isn't it? So you've got what the person's actually saying on the TV, and then like a split second afterwards, you've got the words appearing at the bottom, and sometimes they're wrong, and it's a bit like that, isn't it? Left brain. Never thought of it like that before. Anyway, we've gone on for we've banged on for a long time this afternoon, because there's always so much to say about anxiety. I touched on anxiety in last week's Wellbeing Wednesdays, so I'll put a link in the show notes to. There's a little 5-minute segment on it, and then there's a much longer segment in the full version. There's also there's a couple of podcast episodes that I can really recommend. One by Nicola Bird and one by Amy Johnson, and I'll put links to those two in the show notes too. And they're interviews with people who went from having panic attacks through having some insights about the nature of thought, the nature of experience, the nature of their well-being, the nature of their innate health, and are talking with the interviewer about those. Because, like Brian and I were saying beforehand, it's one thing to hear it from us, but to actually to hear some some very, both the stories are very fresh. That it's like, well, a few weeks ago I was feeling like this, and now I'm feeling like this. So I'll put show notes to those in the I'll put links to those. Brian, where can people find you?
I have a website, brianmcelroygp.com, a Facebook page. I've just started doing one-to-one work again, so I'd be delighted to if people make contact, it'd be wonderful. I also have a YouTube page. That's about it, Giles.
Yeah, I'll put links to all of those in the show notes, and you can find me online at gilespcroft.com. All right, everybody, I hope that was helpful. We love you all. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.